My mother-in-law placed a tick on my hospital blanket 3 days after I gave baby and instructed me to make a decision. The antiseptic odor lingered in the room. My daughter was dozing off in each arm's crook. My husband's girlfriend was standing behind her, carrying a diaper bag as if she already owned the house. The loudest sound in the room was the click Vivian made when she uncapped her black fountain pen. She said, "Take 22 million and sign it. I only want the children." I studied the divorce decree. I signed after glancing at my girls. Then I performed the one thing that none of them had anticipated. After picking up my daughters, I left. The most costly signature matriarch Helena had ever purchased was worthless by the time their attorney awoke the following morning. Calm Drama Stories welcomes you back. I'm Bianca, a 33-year-old actuary who this family used to refer to as just a calculator. This is the tale of the night they paid me to disappear. Morning they discovered my true occupation. Please leave a comment. And be sure to subscribe if you think a quiet woman with the correct statistics can defeat those who believe that money makes them untouchable. This is what I do for a living. I set prices for things that people would prefer not to consider, such as the lifespan of a body, the final cost of care, and the value of a commitment made 20 years later. I work as an actuary. I developed the maths that determines whether insurance firms can honor their commitments for 9 years while sitting in quiet rooms. It's not a glamorous job. It doesn't take good pictures. However, it is truthful and helped me stay grounded long before I needed it. In a town with just one stoplight, my father operated a shopfront where he sold insurance. Short was the last practical lesson he taught me before Grandpa passed away when I was 26. "Bianca, the numbers don't lie," he remarked. "People do." I discovered the distinction. So I did. When a column wouldn't balance, I learned to remain composed. I discovered that panic is simply poor maths done quickly. I remained silent during meetings when my coworkers were boisterous. I don't make noise. I used to tell them that I was accurate. That was funny to the Hartwells. They saw me as the desk ornament Spencer brought home from a conference, the numbers girl who married up. They never once inquired about my strengths. Their first error was that, even before I married into that family, their numbers never sat right with me, so it would take them a long time to feel that way. Every year, Northbridge Assurance Group releases statistics that I read like a smile that falls short of the eyes. It wasn't my company, I told myself, regarding which portion of the line would be important. I was mistaken. Adrian Vale and I met at a New Haven City industry convention. I mistaken ease for warmth since he was appealing in an inexpensive way. He informed me that his late father had founded a long-term care insurance company that was run by his family. He didn't inform me that he was run by his mother. In 18 months, we were married. More out of habit than planning, I continued to use my maiden name and my employment on my licenses. Within 10 minutes of entering Crosswind Estate, the estate perched above town, I knew where I belonged. Vivian greeted me with a smile that filed me somewhere and a cheek that never quite met mine. Her lavender perfume permeated the entire house, seemingly coating the walls. Her husband Victor had passed away years ago, and his picture loomed over the steps as if he were still in charge. In his name, Vivian was in charge. The board followed her instructions. Spencer followed her instructions. At their dinners, I learned how to be amiable and unnoticeable, which worked well for me. I'm not a performer. I had my job, my marriage, and what I believed to be a promising future. I convinced myself that the coldness was merely old money, being old money for 3 years. I was the outsider who would gradually assimilate. I sold myself that narrative. I am also proficient with numbers. However, I've sold myself worse maths than that. When I became pregnant, Vivian began to smile at my tummy rather than through me. Without asking, she would place a hand there and refer to the twins as the 5th generation. I didn't yet know why. But that was the first thing about her that frightened me. People believe that a betrayal catches you off guard. Mine didn't. Since I'm an expert at reading risk, I read the warning flags early. Spencer began working later and later. Then he spoke to me on the phone with a gentleness he had never shown me. The tone of a man is also data. The money then relocated. A transfer to an account I had never seen left, our joint account, for a figure that didn't match any of our bills. I asked him directly about it once. He gazed at his plate while he explained that it was a business matter. I did what I did because I don't believe in plates. I made a hedge. I moved a silent cushion into an account I created in my own name. I copied the mortgage, the policies, the broking statements, and our financial records. And I stored them in a location that only I could access. I packed one bag for the hospital and another, the kind you keep by a door, that I kept a secret from everyone. At night, I even resumed reading Northbridge Assurance Group's public filings, the statutory declarations that all insurers must submit to the state, telling myself that it was a nervous habit. It didn't feel paranoid at all. It was similar to underwriting. You know the storm is coming, so you don't hedge. If it does, you can't afford to be wrong, so you hedge. I was unable to terminate the joint account by myself. Both signatures were required. And my water broke on the day I would have forced the problem. That's the harsh maths of timing. The wave was visible to me. I was unable to close the door before it struck. For a living, I hedge. I never imagined that I would be protecting myself from my own spouse. The twins arrived on a Tuesday, both in the traditional, drawn-out manner, 8 minutes apart, 2 girls, perfect and enraged. Before anyone could comment, I gave them names in the delivery room. Rohan and Lila. My names are small names. 100 years of Hartwell men didn't rhyme with anything when my labor began. Spencer was in a meeting, and when it ended, he was trapped in traffic. He came later, carrying them as if they were on loan, and he smelt somewhat of someone else's perfume. Nora Ellison was the one who held my hand the entire time. My former mentor, Nora, was a retired actuary who had worked in the office of a state regulator for a portion of her career. Before teaching me all the important things, Vivian had not yet arrived. I spent 3 days doing the first honest accounting I had ever done with just 2 heated weights, one in each arm. They both quieted when I hummed off-key, and I committed their fussing and watching behaviors to memory. I convinced myself that the worst was over, and that my marriage's problems could be resolved with time, sleep, and legal counsel. Generally speaking, my forecasting skills are superior to that. But after 3 days, the scent of lavender entered my chamber, while the antiseptic was still strong in the air, and my body was still broken and thankful. It wasn't by itself either. Vivian entered first, followed by Spencer, a man in a gray suit with a folder that looked like a verdict, and a woman I had never met. The young, self-assured woman placed a diaper bag on my chair as though to mark her territory. "This is Livia Marsh, Bianca," Vivian remarked. She said it as if you were introducing a substitute. Livia Marsh smiled pitifully at me. Spencer gazed at the ground. The family's lawyer, Calvin Mercer, was the man in gray. He placed the folder on my tray table and opened it. Relinquishment lines, a settlement, and divorce documents are all waiting for my signature before I give my girls to their grandmother. "It's a clean, generous, fully binding resolution," Calvin said, clearing his throat. "Binding is how you characterize a wall," he remarked. Without asking, Vivian perched on the edge of my bed, uncapped her black fountain pen, and I felt the click. Almost softly, "You were never a family, dear. You were a line item." In fact, Livia Marsh gave a nod. The check was slid across the blanket by Vivian. $22 million for 2 signatures. "The least expensive item I will purchase this year." She gave the surrender a tap. "Once you sign, you'll be rich, free, and gone." She ignored that dot during that moment. I realized why she valued 2 babies at $22 million. It was never sentimental. The management of the business, the chairmanship, and the entire 100-year machine flowed via Hartwell, heirs, and whoever led them when they were young, since Victor had connected the family trust to his bloodline. The board was aware that Spencer was a weak ship. However, Vivian was able to maintain the dynasty for a further 20 years by raising 2 healthy fifth-generation Hartwells. $22 million was not a show of kindness. It was a great deal. There was lavender everywhere. Lila stirred up against my arm. I felt a chill come over me as I stared at Calvin's self-assured folder. The sensation. I get when a number is acting like it's something it's not. For 9 years, I had been looking for weaknesses and walls that men like Calvin insisted were strong. He had just given me his wall and challenged me to rest on it. I leaned as a result. The outraged question, "How could you sign away your own children?" is a common one. The complete narrative is the solution. My mind ran the figures, as it always does when under duress, while Vivian spoke. To begin with, a document signed on a hospital bed does not constitute a court order. A court and sworn affirmation that you comprehend what you are giving up are typically necessary for a true surrender of parental rights. There was no judge in Calvin's folder. It had a threat and a pen. Secondly, no one can truly purchase a child. Property does not equate to custody. A checkbook does not have a vote. Instead, a court makes decisions based on what is best for the child. Thirdly, and most simply, I was their mother. Nothing prevented me from leaving with my babies. Thus, the actual maths was simple. They would outspend me until I broke and drag me through years of legal battle if I refused. I would go with $22 million, my girls, and a paper that I knew was confetti but they thought was a cage if I signed. I would steal their cash, take my daughters, and then destroy them. I then gave her pen a click. For the final time, I signed under my married name, Elara Quinn, slowly, to help them unwind. After that, I put the pen down, capped it, and grabbed for my girls. I declared, "We're done here." We were, but not in the way they believed. There was no yelling way out. Drama is noisy, and noisy individuals don't have a plan. I waited till the floor became quiet and visiting hours subsided. I was already given the all-clear to return home by the hospital. My arms worked, and my girls weighed nearly nothing, but my body was slow and weary. I gave Nora a call. I instructed her to stay nearby, and she came to the parking garage in 20 minutes. I had detested having to use another hedge. I didn't operate a vehicle. I was unable to, not for 3 days. After fastening the car seats in her automobile, Nora and I left the hospital. A month prior, I had already rented a furnished flat in Lakeshore Ridge in my own name. There was already the bag by the door. Nobody was aware. While Rowan observed the passing lights and Leland napped during the ride, I mentally composed a proper, exact, and dated letter. A notice canceling the contract I signed under duress. If you've ever been undervalued, you already know the trick. Being cool doesn't mean giving up. There is a countdown. I wasn't sprinting. In order to get my girls out of reach and allow the fall to fall where it was meant to, I was repositioning, moving like capital before a market flips by sunrise. Everyone was on their side. Spencer, who was never able to keep a secret when he was scared, subsequently told me the shape of it. When Calvin arrived at the office early to submit the relinquishment somewhere formal, he found that there was nowhere to do so. There was no judicial order. No judge had ever heard of it. On its own, it was merely a document that a weary lady signed in front of her husband's mistress while lying in a hospital bed. It was very near to the legal definition of coercion, which a capable court might overturn with a punishment, even worse for them, by 9 in the morning. My registered letter, which was dated and tracked, was already in the mail, canceling the whole affair. Furthermore, I was not prohibited from having my own children by any order. I hadn't stolen any children. Mine had been snatched by me at 10. Vivian gave me a call. I nearly didn't respond. Her voice had become uncontrollable when I did. "Let's be reasonable, Bianca," she remarked. I had never heard her ask rather than tell before, as I do when a customer is freaking out about figures. I maintained my composure. I said, "I am being reasonable. I'm keeping your money and my daughter's. I've never been more sensible than that." She began to make threats. I ended the call. I did the only celebration my nervous system permitted while sitting on the floor of an unfamiliar flat, with 2 infants on a blanket. I compiled a list that the Hartwells had received precisely nothing for $22 million. No control, no silence, and no grandkids. All it had done was buy me some time. I started by hiring a lawyer and fighting for custody, which was the natural course of action. While a sitter kept an eye on the girls in the adjacent room, I located Celine Ward, a family lawyer who was renowned for not blinking, and I set everything out on her conference table. After reading the relinquishment once more, Celine put it down as if it smelt. She declared, "This was never enforceable. Signed under duress. Not a judge. The girlfriend of your husband is present. I could easily get this thrown out." I felt like I could breathe for the first time in days. But pay attention to me. They have $100,000. They can outspend nearly everyone and prolong the conflict for years if they decide to make it a war. They will attempt to portray you as erratic, aloof, and compulsive. They will most likely lose, but a mother does not want to hear probably. I wasn't afraid of her. She was telling the truth. So I bleed the entire time and win slowly. I inquired. Celine gave a nod. "Or you make them want it to end more than you do." I gave that some thought on the way back to Lakeshore Ridge. When the other side controls the rules, I don't fight. I started doing maths in a different way. The girls needed to be safe, but that didn't have to entail going to court. The Hartwells were therefore unable to afford to fight. Celine assured me that I could succeed, but it might require years and all of my resources. So I posed a more subdued query: what fractures them more quickly? I allowed myself to think about the simple retaliation the affair for a while. It was nearly too simple. Livia Marsh and Spencer had not exercised caution. Seldom are those who believe they won't be caught. I had jewelry receipts, hotel expenses, and forwarded mails as proof. Careless traces, nothing criminal. I could have revealed everything. I could have forwarded it to anyone who might be interested, including Vivian's circle and the board. I pictured it. There was genuine satisfaction. In my mind, it lasted for around a weekend. Then I realized what was wrong. Spencer would only be humiliated if he were humiliated. A controversy wouldn't harm Vivian. Livia Marsh would get well. What really mattered was not impacted by any of it. The funds did. They believed they could make decisions about my children's fate in a hospital room because of this. It was only a knife affair. Cutting what made them untouchable was what I needed to do, not cutting him. I then stored the file. It was a brief win, not because I was superior to it. I desired a long-term solution. The question was altered. What's keeping them up, not how I punish them. Everything was altered by that transition. I might win a custody battle, therefore my daughters weren't safe. Only as long as the Hartwells could overpower me would they be safe, and the corporation, Northbridge Assurance Group, was the source of that power. Everything else relied on the flow of money. If you take that away, Vivian was nothing more than a writer. Spencer was really a frail individual to feel permanent. I therefore began to think more like an analyst. Like any insurer, I examined the company's balance sheets, commitments, and obligations, and when I saw it that way, my premarital instinct came back to me. The files were never quite correct. I had previously disregarded them. I couldn't now. I took out their statutory reports, brewed coffee, set the girls aside, and read Northbridge Assurance Group, the method my father had taught me carefully, methodically. I began to wonder what kept the Hartwells upright at all. as pressure is precisely applied to anything that is so brittle. I'll put it simply. That was the moment they started to lose, without knowing it. Northbridge Assurance Group sold long-term care insurance. People pay premiums for decades so that when they are old and can no longer bathe or clothe themselves, the corporation will pay for their nursing care. To make that guarantee, an insurer must hold reserves large amounts of money set aside today to cover future liabilities. The law demands it, and actuaries test it every year to guarantee such reserves are sufficient. The entire industry got this wrong a generation ago. People lived longer than projected, fewer policies lapsed, and care became more expensive. Honest companies reduced premiums, sought regulatory relief, or failed quietly. I knew all of it, so when I analyzed Hartwell's reserves against my own models, my stomach reacted the way it does when a statistic is lying. Their reserves were not simply low, they were dangerously low. Their estimates concerning losses were unreasonable, and their lapse rates did not mirror any real population behavior. Northbridge Assurance Group appeared to be healthier and more profitable than nearly all insurers on paper. That was the issue. That type of health is artificial and not genuine. They were presenting the gap as profit, while offering considerably more care than they had the funds to cover. The river was that profit. Vivian's power was that river. And my daughters were in danger because of that power. The figures weren't inaccurate by chance. Honest mistakes are made by people, and they appeared differently. Numbers don't get anxious, individuals do. Additionally, someone at Hartwell had been anxious for a while. I wanted evidence, not suspicion. And I already had the evidence. A folder containing printouts from Spencer's home office was one of the financial documents I had copied before departing. One page, an internal asset adequacy spreadsheet, stood out among the rest of the cacophony. It contrasted the reported reserves of the corporation with the reserves that, according to its own study, were truly necessary. There was a huge difference between the two. Hold the line through the rate filing was written in Spencer's hand in the margin. His initials and those of the designated actuary were beneath it. I spent a lot of time staring at that page. 2 columns, a truth that is concealed within the organization, and a truth that is submitted to regulators. Both had been autographed by Spencer. Sending it to the media right away would have been simple. However, my understanding of proof was correct. On its own, a single stolen page does not prove anything. It could be disregarded as being out of context or misunderstood. It wasn't a weapon. It was a lead. I had to recreate the same gap using solely public filings, the legal method, until the outcome stood alone in order to make it true. I was advised where to look on the page. The digging was not done by it. I owned that portion. That week, I underwent a transformation. My rage was initially personal. I desired retribution. However, it ceases to be personal when you consider a reserve deficiency of that magnitude. There were actual individuals behind those figures, thousands of policyholders, many of them women and elderly, who had paid premiums for decades in the hopes that their care would be paid for when they needed it. A fixed-income widow was paying premiums she could not afford because she thought her care would be provided in the future. Vivian had used that trust as leverage to exaggerate the family's wealth and influence. I was unable to ignore that section. You can see why it's hard to let go if you've ever trusted someone who is secretly lying to you. My retaliation was altered as a result. It shifted from being about a single man to something bigger, the system that supported him. I had lost interest in disclosing an affair. I intended to reveal a financial disaster, and I would do so by using the regulatory framework that was created to reveal precisely that kind of information. Personal betrayal was no longer the issue. It concerned all of the company's past commitments. I went back to Nora because I needed advice. She went over everything in silence for a long time while we sat at her kitchen table with the girls close by. At last she said, "You built this correctly. However, The next action must be exact. If not, if an actuary raises a legitimate concern regarding the solvency of an insurer, regulators may initiate a thorough financial investigation and require the corporation to provide internal records. If it is successful, the regulator may take further action, including supervision, rehabilitation, and, if required, liquidation. If the results verify insufficient reserves, she didn't make any notes. She didn't have to. Already, the structure was obvious. She sent me a map with the load-bearing wall marked instead of a weapon. "You won't have to attack them if you're correct," she remarked. "All you have to do is tell the truth to the appropriate individuals." I took another look at the number I had independently reconstructed. It was a fantastic match. I realized it was real at that point. Then came the lengthy phase, the part no one films, the weeks when getting retribution is just like doing your homework. The only useful thing I did with some of the Hartwell money was to buy myself the time and equipment I needed to complete the task correctly. I obtained a license for the necessary data. I purchased industry tables. In order to avoid developing a fraud case at a kitchen table with formulas on my sleeve, I rented a desk in a quiet workplace. Using only what the public could see, I reconstructed Northbridge Assurance Group's actual reserve position night after night while Lila and Rowan slept in the adjacent room. Actuarial criteria, mortality and lapse studies, their filed statements. Since I knew who would eventually read it, I didn't take any shortcuts. I tested my presumptions, then more stringent ones, and recorded each step as though an adversarial expert were attempting to dissect it. The tendency of never allowing a number to be close enough, which had previously made me challenging, ceased to be a weakness. It was just what I needed for the first time. When I was done, I had a reserve adequacy study that could be followed line by any regulator. It revealed that Northbridge Assurance Group had a reserve deficit of hundreds of millions, and its public solvency was a farce. Even Hartwell's designated actuary, who had initialed that internal page, would not be able to write it off as conjecture because of how well I constructed it. Spencer discovered me. One evening, he showed up at the rented office, appearing softer and older than I had remembered. He experimented with 3 different versions of himself for 20 minutes. The husband comes first. I was missed by him. He was missing the girls. He had erred. I didn't respond to that one. The negotiator came next. More cash, an improved separation, a more substantial offer than previously. I nearly burst out laughing. The final version, the one that Vivian had sculpted, then emerged. "Bianca, stop digging," he muttered, "not regarding custody. Not in reference to the girls. Simply give up digging. I learned everything from that. A guy who stands up for his kids leads by example." Spencer was a terrified leader. "I'm not digging," I told him. "I'm done." Shaken, he departed. I also realized that my calculations were accurate, and that the single person who could have prevented me was already too terrified of what I would discover. Last but not least, Vivian arrived in a different way than I had anticipated. I met her by myself in a Lakeshore Ridge coffee shop. She was a widow for a short while, instead of the chairwoman. She talked about Victor, how he founded the business, and her pledge to uphold his legacy. The confession followed years ago. During a challenging time for the sector, the reserves had run low. In the hopes that things would get better, she had decided to fill the void. They never did. In order to preserve Victor's reputation, she continued to conceal it year after year. There was humanity. Then she put down her cup. "Those girls are Hartwells. They are worthy of their name. You were a line item." Suddenly, all sympathy vanished. To maintain a lie and claim it as a legacy, she would jeopardize thousands of retirements. I filed as a result, which is in charge of regulating insurers, received my analysis and written complaint. I included all supporting public sources, the methodology, and the whole reserve shortage. Everything was signed in my name, recorded, and replicable. I had nothing to conceal. After reading my cover letter, Nora modified just 2 words. She then gave a nod. I didn't send it out of rage. I emailed it in silence, the kind of quiet that follows total assurance. I personally drove it to the post office, filed it via the proper channels, and retained all of the receipts. No conflict. Don't press. No drama in the courtroom. Just a confirmation, a date stamp, and a filing number. My hands eventually stopped shaking as I sat in my car. I had never done anything so quiet. But it would soon become the loudest. Because a legitimate solvency worry cannot be disregarded by authorities. They have an obligation to take action. The system itself would then move as soon as they did. The load-bearing wall had been pushed by me. The only thing left to do was to take a step back and let the structure recall that it was constructed on a falsehood. Even Nora was surprised at how quickly the department moved. When policyholders are exposed and the maths is clear, regulators take swift action. In a few weeks, the state began looking into Northbridge Assurance Group's finances. The company's working papers and reserve analyzes the internal records that were meant to correspond with what had been submitted were required by examiners. They didn't. Of course, when the state requests to examine both sides of a page, you cannot keep a queue in a drawer. I imagined Calvin receiving the request and discovering too late that the binding wall he relied on had never been structural at all. The rumors began right away. In a small financial market, questions about solvency are never silent. The manufactured stability that gave the corporation an air of strength started to falter. Spencer no longer visited the office. Vivian attempted to brush the test off as a standard procedure. However, individuals who are starting to realize they should be concerned cannot be reassured. As she watched things fall apart, Livia Marsh began to wonder about the true source of the Hartwell funds. Before the wreckage completely settled, she vanished, just another survivor. I was no longer needed in any of this. That was the idea. I had given the truth to the system that was supposed to act upon it, and now it was acting on its own. Vivian had devoted her entire life to creating a legacy that would last for a century. The state asked the one question she had shied away from for decades in just 9 business days after the exam began. Furthermore, no fountain pen, no matter how costly, can write itself out of money that never existed. The first to depart was Livia Marsh. I've heard that, as the company's stability began to deteriorate, she stopped returning Spencer's calls and just disappeared. She had adored the Hartwell name, not Spencer. She broke along with that delusion that has a bittersweet sense of justice. For someone who was simply interested in the appearance of money, Spencer had betrayed me, and she didn't hesitate to leave when the appearance broke. I didn't have a celebration. I had a procedure to complete and kids to raise, but when I heard she was gone, I gave myself permission to feel a little relieved. In the meantime, Vivian attempted to reclaim power through authority, which was the only method she could think of. As if the situation could still be controlled by willpower, she called me to the company's annual policyholder meeting at headquarters. Come, speak, and end this quietly. She continued to think that there was a number that might purchase silence, or a threat that could compel obedience. She was unaware that there was nothing left for her to take from me. I had my daughters with me. I had my money. Regulators had already taken up my matter. She was asking me to participate in a negotiation that had concluded at a post office parking lot weeks before. I decided to go because I wanted to be there when the truth finally got to the people she had kept it from. Not because she was powerful. Justice and retaliation are not the same thing. You take revenge. Justice is something you support as it takes place. So I went. I dressed simply, like someone who doesn't require performance and works with numbers. I drove downtown and made childcare arrangements. The meeting took place in the Northbridge Assurance Group Headquarters Main Hall, which is intended to reassure individuals regarding their finances. A banner honoring a century of legacy, rows of chairs, and a tiny stage. The majority of the policyholders in the room were elderly, and many of them were couples who had relied on the company for many years. A few people used canes. Like a lifeline, one woman gripped her policy folder. These individuals were responsible for the reserves, those whose confidence had been subtly exploited. Reporters were also present. Rumors about solvency constantly garner attention. Sensing tension, board members sat rigidly to one side. Vivian, dressed in lavender and pearls, stood calmly at the front, her black fountain pen resting next to her notes in order to convey control. She had set up the space like a stage. She saw me and grinned confident, unwavering when I walked in and took a seat close to the back. She thought she still had a say in how things turned out. I was totally at ease. She believed she had created a stage for herself. She was unaware that she had also constructed it for me, as usual. Vivian greeted the group with warmth, composure, and authority. She expressed gratitude to the devoted policyholders. Then she began to talk. With a cool, almost amused smile, she acknowledged the rumors and referred to them as the noise of cynics and rivals. She used the term strong multiple times, more than any strong business should ever have to, and pledged a record year. The mood of the room abruptly changed when the side door opened. Two individuals came in. One was a woman wearing a simple suit with a leather folder and a state lanyard. The examiner, the other, was carrying a banker's case of paperwork. Vivian stopped talking in the middle of her sentence. The examiner remained silent. She gave a formal introduction and said, in the bland language of regulation, that the commissioner had petitioned the court after Northbridge Assurance Group's finances were examined. With immediate effect, the corporation was placed under state control, and new business was halted until legal action was taken. She spoke it as though it were a predetermined reality. A murmur swept across the crowd like grass in the breeze. The woman tightened her grip on the folder containing her statements. Members of the board tensed up. A reporter started writing quickly. As reality arrived in a leather folder, Vivian remained motionless at the podium, her prepared speech still unfinished. Nobody moved for a moment. Ironically, the corporate banner loomed over them. There was no basis for the strength it claimed. Then Vivian cracked. All of a sudden, the control she had always wore crumbled. With a voice full of dread and rage, she clutched the podium, calling it a conspiracy, a setup, and the work of jealous people. She demanded to know who was in charge. I was in the back of the room when she looked at me. You, she pointed. This is her, the wife of my son. As if she could still sign her way out, she reached for the fountain pen on the podium. However, her hand was trembling so much that the ink just smudged the page. My life was once signed with a pen that was unable to write a straight line. I got to my feet. The room had to see who was responding. Moved forward leisurely and slowly. How you move when the result is predetermined. The press pivoted. The policyholders pivoted. I paused a few feet away from Vivian and whispered quietly. I answered, I don't get loud. I am accurate. Then I went on. You said that I was never related. Only a line item. As the cheapest thing she'd ever buy had really bought her a motivated actuary with time and proof. However, the Hartwells were not the folks I cared about in that room. Turned my back on her and spoke to the policyholders. Everyone was afraid as the woman in the front row stood shakily and asked if their care money was secure. There was silence in the room. Vivian was at a loss for words. I gave it. Then, I made it quite evident that the corporation had not saved enough money to keep all of its commitments. That was accurate. However, I also clarified that the state's participation was protection rather than collapse. The The purpose of the supervisory process is to safeguard policyholders through guarantees and rehabilitation methods, maintain policies, and stabilize businesses instead of abandoning them. The state had intervened to protect them. The truth was being spoken aloud on their behalf for the first time in that room. The examiner next to me nodded slightly. My study and her findings were exactly in line. It came to an end at that point. It wasn't because Vivian felt ashamed, but rather because the people she had deceived were now being addressed honestly. The fall came swiftly after. Northbridge Assurance Group entered a state-run. The appearance of financial might, the family's wealth, which was solely dependent on the business, started to fall apart. The assets were reevaluated. The once permanent estate started to disappear. Furthermore, Victor's name, the legacy Vivian had attempted to preserve, was now linked to news stories and headlines about fraud and bankruptcy. She had made an effort to keep his memories intact. Rather, she demolished it. Because of his involvement in the internal documents and fraudulent promises, Spencer was subject to personal repercussions. Livia Marsh had already left. The legal systems they had relied on were now evidence rather than protection. They had thought they were untouchable because of their wealth. The one risk they had overlooked was that of someone who was prepared to read the numbers honestly and take appropriate action. Something they did to themselves. I just refused to turn away and told the truth to those with the power to take appropriate action. I then let the system take care of the rest. It all began with the custody issue, which ended almost as an afterthought, exactly what it deserved to be. When it got to a real courtroom, a judge used the best interest of the child, which is the only criteria that really counts. The hospital bed surrender never stood a chance. There was a mistress present, no oath, and no judge conditions that are extremely similar to textbook duress. Their father had never really battled for custody and was already the subject of a fraud probe. In a respectable manner, their mother was steady, present, and financially secure. The documents Vivian had spent $22 million on were worth exactly what I had discovered in that hospital room. Nothing. Lila and Rowan stayed with me when a judge rendered the final ruling. My settlement was also upheld. That frequently surprises people, but there is a straightforward reason. The insurer did not provide the funds. It originated from the family's personal trust and marital assets, which were untouchable by the regulator's recovery procedure. The court handled property and custody as distinct legal issues, just as they are. Although the custody relinquishment was void due to the duress, I had consciously consented to a negotiated cash settlement. A judge has the authority to strike out the unlawful portion and uphold the remainder. That's what took place. Even though I kept a reserve for unforeseen circumstances, I never needed it. Then something unexpected happened. Actuaries with first-hand knowledge of Northbridge Assurance Group were required by the court-appointed receiver overseeing the company's demise. Naturally, hiring me personally raised concerns about a conflict of interest. I was hired as an outside consultant through formal court procedures, kept apart from anything pertaining to my own divorce or custody issue, and had my work evaluated by an impartial actuary. I accepted. Cleared in that manner, I utilized a portion of that money to keep the servicing business stable and continue paying claims. Widows and retirees who were policyholders continued to receive their care as Vivian looks on from the outside. I now honestly sign those checks under what was once Victor Hale's business. I also reclaimed my own name. Now we are the Toomey girls. The three of us. They were so certain that the person with the money, the attorneys, and the power was the dangerous one in that hospital room. The silent woman in bed, who already knew that numbers, like children, should never be owned, was never taken into consideration. It ended that way. An unwriting fountain pen, an unbalanced ledger. Beneath the name that was always theirs, two young girls slept. You already knew why it ended this way, if you were familiar with the numbers. Which line would you have read first, please? And keep in mind that calm always wins out here.